Hello, I'm Sister Kathleen O'Neill, and I'd like to speak today to a little bit of a question that we received. What should I do when I become discouraged in my prayer life, when I don't think I'm doing it right or God may not be listening? Well, each of those partial questions could take a whole talk. I'll just say a few brief things about the last part of it. Obviously, the bit about God may not be listening, that's talking about feelings. I mean, we all know God is not capricious. God is always listening to his beloved children. But we can feel like God is not listening for a variety of reasons. And rather than get into that question in depth, because I'd really like to get back to the first question, I'll just say we need to trust that God is listening. And we need to just take it on faith and persevere, basically. God, we may feel empty, but that's okay. God is delighted that we're praying, even though we may not get satisfaction out of it. And then when I feel that I'm not doing it right, that's a little bit of a different question. And we can get that way, especially if we're not getting much out of prayer. Our prayer's very distracted. I don't seem to be going anywhere. I don't know what I'm doing in prayer. So what then? Well, for myself, I take always great consolation in the words of Romans 8. The Holy Spirit intercedes for the saints with sighs too deep for words. And God, who searches the human heart, knows what is the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the holy ones according to the will of God. So we can trust that if we are making any effort to pray, that the Spirit of God is praying within for us, that Jesus is praying within for us. So there isn't a right way to pray or a wrong way to pray. I'll come back to this probably in another talk, but most of the classic monastic writers say relatively little about how to pray. They mostly speak about how to live. And the presumption there is as our life is transformed, our prayer will become deeper. And that's, so they focus on the life. What are we doing in our life? But now, to get to the first question, again, which is, what should I do when I become discouraged in my prayer life? So, for starters, most of us do become discouraged to one way or another. And in fact, discouragement is one of the great enemies in the spiritual life. Probably discouragement and anger are the two great enemies of our spiritual life. So, the first thing, obviously, is to recognize it. I'm discouraged. And then another thing to do can be to just say, you know, what I'm going through may very well be very normal. We don't always feel the warmth of prayer. We don't always experience God's presence. To become discouraged or to feel like I'm not getting anywhere is a very common experience. Well, I have a few little old desert father stories. If you're not familiar with the desert fathers and mothers, but there were more fathers at least recorded, they lived especially in the 4th and 5th centuries of the Christian era, and had a lot of little pithy sayings. So one that I recall is one of them said something to this effect, and it's always fine to interpret desert father stories and tell them in your own words. So one of them says something like, you know, you can make some progress in life with your anger, with your sexual drives, with your discouragement, whatever. But prayer is a struggle to the dying breath. So just know you are participating in a greater spiritual process that your sisters and brothers are united with you in. You're part of a greater movement, the movement of all of those who are wanting to be with God, who are wanting to be part of the kingdom, who are praying for the kingdom to come. So that's one thing we can do. Prayer is a struggle to the dying breath. Oh, okay, this is normal. This is not unusual, what I'm going through. So another Desert Father story. So this is about a monk who comes to the Abba and he says, you know, I'm quitting. He says, I'm going back to the world. I've been here for 3 months and I haven't had a single day of peace. And the Abba looks at him and says, I've been here 30 years and I haven't had a single day of peace. So the young monk stays. He gets the message. We don't always get warm fuzzies. We don't always get satisfaction in our prayer. Hopefully sometimes we do, but it's not something we always get. We're most often asked to continue praying without necessarily a lot of satisfaction, but with trust. Now, the third Desert Father story is another young monk. That's the usual setup. A monk goes to the Abba and says, help. So this monk goes to one Abba and he says, you know, I'm just terribly distracted. I can't do a thing. My whole spiritual life is dried up. What should I do? And the Abba says, look, just stay in your cell and do the regular times of prayer and, you know, that's it. Good enough. Fine. Well, he's not quite satisfied with that, and he goes to another Abba, and Abba, he says to him, what do I do? You know, Abba so-and-so told me, just stay in your cell and pray the regular times. And, you know, but even that's really hard. This Abba said, listen, if you can't pray the regular times, don't pray the regular times, but stay in your cell. So the moral of it is, I mean, we're all in a lot of us are in our cells right now with the COVID. The point is to persevere, right? We stick with it. One other thing that can be helpful, and then I want to quit this because it's time. Another thing that can be helpful, however, can be to have fixed times and fixed places. If I become discouraged in my prayer life, it's wise, prudent to have certain times of the day that I do pray. And even if it goes nowhere, that's okay. Again, I'm participating in the common struggle of all my sisters and brothers to allow God's presence to penetrate our world. So I'd like to close with a little prayer from the letter to the Romans. May God, the source of hope, fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that through the power of the Holy Spirit, you may have hope in abundance.